If you ever see something you're not supposed to, pretend you didn't, my mother used to say. But no one ever tells you what to do when pretending feels more dangerous than the truth. The night before everything changed, I was just a waitress finishing a double shift, my feet aching inside worn-out black flats, my uniform clinging to me from the heat of the kitchen, counting tips under the dim light behind the restaurant while the city outside hummed past midnight. And then I saw him. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a man stepping out of a black car that looked too expensive for this side of town, his shoes hitting the pavement with quiet precision, like he owned not just the street but the silence around it. I remember thinking he didn't belong here, not in a place where the neon sign flickered and the sidewalk cracked under years of neglect. But he walked in anyway, and everything shifted without anyone saying a word. The air tightened. Conversations lowered. Even the bartender, who never shut up, suddenly found something very interesting to clean. I didn't know his name then, not officially, but I knew the feeling he brought with him. Power. Controlled. Measured. Dangerous in a way that didn't need to prove itself. I kept my head down, doing what I always did. Serve, smile, disappear, but I noticed things. The way people looked at him, but never too long. The way his eyes moved across the room like he was reading it, like every detail mattered. And then, just for a second, those eyes landed on me. Not in a way that made me feel small. In a way that made me feel seen. I looked away first. I always do. That should have been the end of it. Just another shift, another face, another night blending into the next. But when I stepped outside after closing, the alley behind the restaurant quieter than usual, I heard voices. Low. Tense. Not meant to be overheard. I froze by the back door, my hand still on the handle, my heart starting to pound in a rhythm I couldn't control. I didn't understand the words, not all of them, but I understood enough. Money. Timing. Delivery. The kind of conversation that doesn't belong in the open. And then I saw him again. Same man. Same calm presence. Only now there was something colder in his expression, something sharper beneath the surface. He wasn't just passing through. He was the center of it. I should have walked away. I should have gone back inside, grabbed my bag, and left like nothing happened. But I didn't. I stayed just long enough for my shadow to shift under the light, just long enough for someone to notice. The voices stopped. Silence dropped like a curtain. I didn't wait to see who saw me. I left. Fast. The drive home was a blur of red lights and shaking hands on the steering wheel, my mind replaying every second, every glance, every word I wasn't supposed to hear. By the time I got to my apartment, I had already decided. I would forget. Pretend it never happened. Because people like him don't cross paths with people like me without consequences. And I had no intention of becoming one. But the next day, when I tied my apron and stepped back onto that same restaurant floor, I realized something worse than being seen. He was already there, waiting. And this time, he was looking right at me. I should have called in sick that morning, but rent does not care about instincts, and neither does life when it decides to test you twice in a row. I tied my apron tighter than usual, like it could somehow hold me together, and stepped onto the floor pretending nothing had changed, pretending I had not seen him the night before, pretending I had not heard words that did not belong to someone like me. But the moment I looked up, I knew pretending was already too late. He was sitting at the far end of the room. Same controlled posture. Same stillness that somehow drew more attention than movement ever could. A dark suit tailored so precisely it looked like it had been designed around him instead of worn. One hand resting lightly on the table, the other holding a glass he had not touched. He was not with a crowd this time. Just two men standing nearby, not sitting, not eating, just watching. Not the restaurant. Watching me. My chest tightened, but I kept moving, because stopping would have been worse, because drawing attention was the last thing I could afford. Table 7 needed refills. Table 4 asked for extra napkins. Normal things. Safe things. I repeated them in my head like a script, grounding myself in the routine, in the familiar rhythm of plates and orders and forced smiles. But every step felt measured, every movement too loud in my own ears, like I was performing under a spotlight no one else could see. I told myself he might not remember me, that I was just another face from the night before, another waitress blending into the background. People like him did not remember people like me. That is what I wanted to believe. Until I felt it again. That same weight. That same presence. I did not need to look to know his eyes were on me. I tried anyway. Just a glance. Just a second. And that was all it took. He was already watching. Not casually. Not accidentally. Intentionally. Like he had been waiting for me to look. I looked away first. My hand trembled as I picked up a tray, the glasses clinking softly against each other. A sound that felt too sharp in the quiet tension I could not explain to anyone else in the room. No one noticed. Or maybe they chose not to. I moved toward his table because avoiding it would have been obvious, and obvious was dangerous in ways I did not fully understand yet. Up close, everything about him felt sharper. The faint scent of something expensive and clean, the precise line of his jaw, the stillness that made the rest of the room feel chaotic by comparison. I kept my eyes on the table as I set down a glass of water he had not asked for, my voice steady only because I forced it to be. "Can I get you anything else?" It was a simple question. Routine. Safe. He did not answer right away. Silence stretched just long enough to make my heart beat louder than it should have been. Then he spoke. Low. Controlled. Each word placed with intention. "You saw something last night." It was not a question. My fingers tightened around the edge of the tray, but I did not look up. Deny. That was the plan. Forget. That was the promise I made to myself. "I do not know what you mean," I said, the lie slipping out smoother than I expected, years of practice in avoiding trouble. Guiding me now. Another pause. I could feel it. The way he studied me without needing to move. The way silence seemed to belong to him. "Then we have nothing to worry about," he said finally. But there was something beneath it, something that made the words feel heavier than they should have. Relief should have followed. It did not. Because as I turned to leave, I noticed it. A folded napkin on the edge of his table, positioned too precisely to be accidental, the corner angled just slightly toward me. A signal. Not random. Not meaningless. Intentional. And somehow, without understanding how or why, I knew exactly what it meant. He was not asking if I had seen something. He was telling me he already knew. And the next move was not mine to make. I did not touch the napkin right away because touching it would mean I understood, and understanding meant I was already involved in something I had no business being part of, but my hand hovered over it longer than it should have, my fingers brushing the fabric just enough to feel the deliberate fold, sharp, precise, like everything else about him. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach drop in a way no fear had managed to do before. This was not about what I saw last night. This was about what he thought I could do now. I forced myself to move, to continue working, to act like nothing had changed, but everything had, because now I was aware of him in a way that made every second feel heavier, every step measured, every glance calculated, and yet I could still feel it, that quiet pull, like I was being drawn into something I did not fully understand but could not ignore either. I carried the tray back to the service station, set it down, and unfolded the napkin just enough to see what was hidden inside. Not words, not numbers, just a small, almost invisible mark drawn in ink. A simple line intersecting another at an angle that looked meaningless until it was not, until my mind connected it to something I had seen before, something from the night in the alley. The way one of the men had tapped his watch twice and then adjusted his cuff. The same pattern, the same silent language, and suddenly my breath caught because this was not random, this was a code. I folded the napkin back quickly, my heart racing now for a different reason, not just fear, but realization. He was not testing me to see if I would speak, he was testing me to see if I would understand, and somehow, without wanting to, I did. I should have ignored it, should have thrown it away, should have walked out of that restaurant and never come back. But something stopped me, something quiet but insistent, because if he believed I understood, then doing nothing might be just as dangerous as doing something wrong. I glanced across the room, careful, subtle, and he was still there, still watching, but not directly now, his attention appearing elsewhere, like he had already moved on, like the decision was no longer his to make. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to think, to piece together what he wanted without ever saying it. And then it clicked. The signal was not for me alone. It was meant to be seen by someone else, someone in this room, someone who would recognize it the same way I had. And that meant one thing. There was more to this place than I had ever realized. My eyes moved slowly, scanning the tables, the staff, the customers who suddenly did not feel like strangers anymore, looking for something that did not belong, something that matched the tension I could now feel beneath the surface. And then I saw him, a man near the bar, dressed like any other customer, but too still, too focused, his gaze flicking briefly toward Adrian before returning to his drink. And in that split second, I understood. The signal was not a warning for me. It was bait. My throat went dry as the weight of it settled in, because if that was true, then whatever was about to happen was already in motion, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I turned back to the napkin in my hand, my fingers tightening around it as a thought formed, sharp and unexpected. If I did nothing, I was just a bystander. But if I acted, even in the smallest way, I could change something, and I did not know why that mattered to me. Not yet, not fully, but it did. I took a breath, slow and controlled, just like I had seen him do, and stepped back onto the floor, my movements steady now for a different reason, because this time, I was not just being watched, I was choosing to play along, and as I approached the table near the bar, the one with the man who did not quite belong, I adjusted the glass in front of him, just slightly, just enough to mirror the signal I had seen, my hand brushing the edge in a way that looked accidental to anyone else, and then I walked away. Without looking back, my heart racing, my mind already knowing, whatever came next, there was no going back to being invisible. The moment my fingers left that glass, I felt it, not in the room, not in the noise of plates and low conversations, but deeper, like something unseen had shifted its attention, like a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed, and suddenly every second stretched longer than it should have, every sound sharper, every movement more deliberate. I kept walking, forcing my pace to stay even, my expression neutral, because anything else would draw attention, and attention was the one thing I could not afford now. Behind me, I did not hear anything unusual. No raised voices. No sudden reactions. Just the steady hum of a restaurant pretending to be ordinary. But that was the problem. It was too ordinary. Too controlled. I reached the service station and placed the tray down, my hands steady even though my pulse was not, and I told myself not to look, not to turn around, not to check if what I had just done had mattered, because if it had, then it would reveal itself soon enough. And it did. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a subtle change. The man at the bar, the one who did not quite belong, shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening slightly around his glass before relaxing again, his eyes flicking once, twice. Not at me, not at anyone directly, but across the room in a pattern that mirrored the signal I had just given. Recognition. That was what it was. He had seen it. He had understood. And that meant this was real. My stomach twisted as the realization settled in deeper, because now I was not just observing something dangerous, I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I moved again, picking up another order, delivering it to a table that did not matter, my mind only half present as I tracked the subtle movements unfolding around me, the invisible conversation happening in glances and pauses and silence. And then I felt it again. Him. Not looking at me this time, but aware, always aware, like he could sense the exact moment everything began to align. I risked a glance, just one, and saw that he had not moved. Not really, but something in his posture had changed, a slight shift forward, a quiet readiness, like a man who already knew how this would end. The two men near him were no longer still either, their positions adjusting by inches, nothing obvious, nothing that would alarm anyone who was not paying attention. But I was paying attention now. I could not stop. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had moved in without anyone noticing. The man at the bar stood up slowly, too casually, like he was just another customer finishing his drink, but his eyes betrayed him, sharp, calculating, scanning for something, for someone, and I knew without knowing how that he was looking for confirmation, for a sign that it was time to act. My breath caught, my fingers tightening around the edge of a menu as I passed by another table, because I understood now what I had stepped into, not just a message, not just a signal, but a setup, something carefully arranged, something that required precision and timing, and somehow, impossibly, I had become part of that timing. I turned toward the kitchen, needing space, needing a second to think, but before I could take another step, his voice reached me, low, controlled, cutting through everything without needing to be loud. Emily. I froze. My name. Not guessed. Not assumed. Known. Slowly, I turned back, my heart pounding so hard I was sure someone else could hear it, and met his eyes again. Those same eyes that had found me twice now when I least wanted them to. And for a moment, the rest of the room disappeared. "Do not move," he said quietly, not a command shouted across the room, but something meant only for me, something that felt heavier than any raised voice ever could. I did not argue. I did not ask why, because in that moment, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever was about to happen next, he had already decided where I needed to stand. I did not move. Not because I trusted him, not because I understood what was happening, but because something in his voice made it clear that moving would be the wrong choice, the kind of mistake you do not get to correct. My body stayed exactly where it was, half turned toward the kitchen, half exposed to a room that no longer felt like a restaurant, my breath shallow, controlled, like I was trying not to disturb something fragile in the air. Around me, everything continued as if nothing had changed. Plates clinked softly, a couple laughed too loudly near the window, someone asked for the check. Normal sounds layered over something that was anything but normal. And yet beneath it, I could feel it building, quiet and precise, like a clock ticking toward a moment only a few people in the room were aware of. I kept my eyes forward at first, afraid that looking would make it real, but then I saw a movement from the corner of my vision, the man from the bar stepping away, not quickly, not suspiciously, just enough to reposition himself closer to the center of the room, closer to Adrian, though he never looked directly at him. My pulse picked up again, louder now, harder to ignore, because I knew what that meant. He had taken the signal. He had responded. And whatever came next was already in motion. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay still, to trust that standing here was somehow safer than trying to leave, even though every instinct I had told me to run, to get out, to pretend I had never seen any of this. But I did not run, because he told me not to move. And for reasons I could not fully explain, I believed that mattered. Another shift in the room. Subtle. Controlled. The two men near Adrian adjusted again, one stepping slightly to the side, the other turning just enough to create a line of sight that had not been there before, their movements so small no one else noticed. But I did, because now I was watching the same way they were. Reading the same silent language I had stumbled into without meaning to. The man from the bar reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate, and my breath caught, not because I saw anything clearly, but because of what the motion suggested, because of the intent behind it. And for a split second, panic flared in my chest, sharp and immediate, telling me to move, to do something, anything, but I stayed where I was, frozen between instinct and instruction. And then it happened, not loudly, not violently, but with a kind of precision that made it more unsettling than chaos ever could. One of Adrian's men stepped forward, intercepting the movement before it could become something else, their interaction quick, controlled, contained in a way that drew almost no attention from the surrounding tables, just a brief disturbance, a shift in space that most people would dismiss as nothing more than a misunderstanding between customers. But it was not nothing. I could see it in the way the man from the bar stiffened, in the way his confidence cracked for just a second before he recovered, in the way Adrian remained seated, completely still, as if this outcome had never been in question. My heart pounded as I watched, unable to look away now, because I understood what I was seeing, not the details, not the full picture, but the structure of it, the control, the way everything had been anticipated before it even began. The man from the bar was guided away, not dragged, not forced, just redirected with quiet authority, like he had suddenly realized he was no longer in control of where this moment would take him. And then, just like that, the room settled again. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned. The illusion of normal snapped back into place so seamlessly it almost made me question if I had imagined it. Almost. But I had not imagined the way my hands were still trembling, or the way my chest felt tight, or the way my eyes were drawn back to him, to Adrian, who had not moved this entire time, who now slowly lifted his glass, finally taking a sip like nothing had happened at all. And then he looked at me again, not with surprise, not with curiosity, with certainty, like he had known from the very beginning exactly what I would do. And in that moment, I realized something that sent a different kind of chill through me, deeper, quieter, more dangerous than fear. I had not just followed his signal. I had become part of his plan. The room returned to normal, but I did not. Something inside me had shifted, something quiet but permanent, like a line had been drawn between who I was before tonight and who I had just become without realizing it. And no matter how still everything looked around me, I could not unsee the patterns anymore, could not unfeel the weight of what had just happened right in front of me without anyone else truly noticing. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, the way I had seen him do, grounding myself in something simple because nothing else felt simple anymore. My hands were still trembling, so I picked up a tray just to give them purpose, just to make it look like I was still part of the same world as everyone else, even though I knew I was not. Not anymore. I moved through the tables, responding to customers, nodding, smiling when needed, every action automatic, practiced, but my awareness stayed locked on him, on Adrian, because now I understood something I had not before. He was not reacting to situations. He was creating them, shaping them before anyone else even realized they existed. And somehow, impossibly, I had stepped into that shape. I should have been angry. I should have been afraid enough to walk out, to leave this job, this place, this entire situation behind. But instead, there was something else layered beneath the fear, something quieter, sharper, harder to name. Curiosity. Not about him. About what he saw when he looked at me. Because that look had not been random. It had not been careless. It had been intentional from the beginning. I felt it again before I heard it, that subtle shift in presence, that awareness that meant he was moving. And when I turned slightly, just enough to confirm, he was already standing, his chair pushed back without a sound, his posture the same as always, controlled, precise, like the room itself adjusted to him rather than the other way around. Conversations near him softened again, not because anyone was told to be quiet, but because something in his presence demanded it without words. He stepped toward me, not fast, not slow, just certain, and every instinct I had told me to step back, to create distance, but my feet did not move, not because I was frozen this time, but because I needed to understand what came next. He stopped just close enough that I could feel the difference in the air, that subtle shift that always followed him, and for a second, neither of us spoke. I could hear my own heartbeat again, steady but strong, louder than it should have been. Then his voice, low, controlled, exactly the way it had been before. You followed the signal. It was not praise. It was not surprise. It was acknowledgement. I swallowed, my grip tightening slightly on the tray in my hands. I did not know what it meant, I said, and this time it was not entirely a lie. His eyes held mine, steady, unreadable, searching for something deeper than the words I had just spoken. You knew enough, he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the realization that he was not just talking about the signal anymore. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out, because what was I supposed to say to that? What explanation could make sense of something I barely understood myself? He did not wait for an answer. He did not need one. Instead, his gaze shifted briefly, scanning the room once more, confirming what he already knew, that everything had settled, that whatever had been set in motion had reached its conclusion. Then he looked back at me, and this time there was something different there, something quieter, more focused. You should not have been in that alley, he said, and the words hit harder than anything else he had said so far, because they pulled everything back to the beginning, to the moment I had made the first mistake that led me here. My breath caught slightly, and for the first time, I felt something close to real fear again, because if he knew that, then he knew more than I had ever wanted him to. I did not mean to be, I answered, softly, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, a subtle shift, like he was recalculating, adjusting something I could not see. Intent does not change consequence, he said quietly, and there was no threat in his voice, just certainty, the kind that made it impossible to argue. I stood there, caught between wanting to leave and knowing I could not, because this conversation was not something I could simply walk away from. Then, after a brief pause that felt longer than it was, he added, softer this time, but no less clear. But it can change what happens next. And just like that, I understood. This was not over. Not even close. Whatever I had stepped into, it was only just beginning. I should have stepped back when he said that, should have created distance, drawn a line between his world and mine before it blurred any further. But my feet stayed rooted to the floor, my hands still gripping the tray like it was the only solid thing left in a room that no longer felt stable. His words lingered in the air, quiet but impossible to ignore, because they were not just a warning, They were an invitation, and that was what unsettled me the most. Not the danger, not the control, but the fact that he was giving me a choice, or at least making it feel like one. I forced myself to breathe again, slow and steady, trying to find something normal in the rhythm of it, something that reminded me I was still just a waitress in a restaurant and not standing in the middle of something far bigger than I understood. What happens next? I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out softer than I intended, but clear enough that there was no taking it back. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression, not surprise, not exactly, but recognition, like he had been waiting to see if I would ask that exact question. His gaze held mine, steady, measuring, and I felt it again, that quiet intensity that made everything else fade into the background. That depends, he said, his voice even, controlled, on whether you continue to see what others miss. My grip tightened slightly, the edge of the tray pressing into my palm, grounding me as I processed what he was saying, because it was not about what I had already seen, it was about what I might see next, what I might choose to notice, and what that would mean for both of us. I should have said no, should have stepped away, returned to my tables, let this moment dissolve into something I could pretend never happened. But the truth was, I could not pretend anymore. Not after the alley, not after the signal, not after realizing how much could happen right in front of people who never noticed a thing. And if I do not? I asked, testing the edge of it, needing to understand where the boundary really was. His expression did not change, but there was something final in the way he answered. Then you go back to your life, he said simply. And this becomes a night you try to forget. Try. Not well. The distinction settled heavily in my chest, because we both knew forgetting was not that simple. Not now. Not after everything I had already seen. A silence followed, not uncomfortable, but charged with something unspoken, something that felt like the moment before a decision becomes irreversible. I glanced around the room, at the customers laughing, at the staff moving through their shifts, at the normal life that still existed just a few feet away from where I stood, and for the first time, it felt distant, like something I was already stepping away from without fully realizing it. When I looked back at him, he was still watching me, still waiting, not pushing, not forcing, just allowing the choice to sit between us like something real. My heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from the weight of it, from the understanding that whatever I said next would matter in ways I could not predict. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, and met his gaze without looking away. I already did, I said quietly, and the moment the words left my mouth, I knew it was true. I had already chosen the second I touched that napkin, the second I mirrored that signal, the second I decided not to walk away. Something shifted in his eyes then, subtle but unmistakable, not approval, not satisfaction, but acknowledgement, like a piece had fallen into place exactly where it was meant to. He nodded once, a small, controlled motion, and stepped back just slightly, enough to create space but not distance. Then pay attention, he said, his voice lower now, more focused, because next time, the signal will not be for them. A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from the realization of what that meant, because if the next signal was not for them, then it was for me, and whatever came with it would not be something I could observe from a distance. It would be something I was meant to act on. And as he turned to leave, his presence already beginning to shift the room again without effort, I stood there for a second longer, the tray still in my hands, my world no longer as simple as it had been just hours ago, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. I was not invisible anymore. The door closed behind him without a sound, but the absence of his presence did not bring relief the way I expected it to. If anything, it made everything feel louder, sharper, like the world had been dimmed while he was there, and now the brightness was almost too much to process all at once. I stood in the same spot for a second longer than I should have, my fingers still wrapped around the tray, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had just happened, every word, every look, every decision I had made without fully understanding it in the moment. Emily, the voice snapped me back. It was Lisa from the next section, her brow slightly furrowed, concern mixed with impatience. Table 12 has been waiting like 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It felt like 10 seconds. Or 10 hours. Time did not make sense anymore. Right? I said quickly, forcing my body to move again, to step back into the version of myself that existed before tonight. even if it no longer fit the same way. I picked up the order, carried it across the room, smiled when expected, apologized for the delay, all the things I had done 100 times before without thinking. But now I was thinking about everything. Every glance, every pause, every person in the room who might not be who they seemed. I set the plates down carefully, my hands steadier now. Not because the tension had faded, but because I was learning to move with it instead of against it. That was the difference. That was what had changed. By the time the shift ended, the restaurant looked exactly the same as it always did. Chairs tucked in, lights dimmed, the smell of cleaning solution replacing the scent of food. Everything reset for the next day, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I grabbed my bag from the back room, my fingers lingering for a second on the zipper before I pulled it closed. A small, normal action that felt heavier than it should have. "You okay?" Lisa asked again as she passed by, softer this time. I nodded automatically. Just tired. It was not a lie. It just was not the whole truth. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the city stretching out in front of me like it always did, cars passing, streetlights flickering, people moving through their own lives without noticing anything unusual. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in, trying to decide if I could still be part of that world, if I could just walk away and pretend this night had not changed something fundamental inside me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the sudden vibration making my heart jump in a way that felt too familiar now. I pulled it out, expecting a message from work, maybe a reminder about my schedule, something ordinary. But the screen showed an unknown number. No name, no history, just a single message. I hesitated for a second before opening it, my thumb hovering like I already knew this was not going to be something simple. When I finally tapped the screen, the message appeared instantly. No greeting, no explanation, just a line. "Midnight. Do not be late." My breath caught, my eyes scanning the words again like they might change if I looked at them long enough. But they did not. They stayed exactly the same, clear, direct, impossible to misinterpret. I glanced up instinctively, my gaze moving across the street, across the passing cars, across the shadows that now felt deeper than they had before, and for a split second, I thought I saw it. A black car parked just far enough away to blend in, just close enough to feel intentional. My pulse quickened again, but this time it was not just fear driving it. It was something else. Something that felt like the beginning of something I could not stop anymore, even if I wanted to. I looked back down at the message, my grip tightening slightly around the phone, because I understood what this was. Not a request, not a suggestion, a continuation. I had made my choice inside that restaurant. This was what came after. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself the same way I had learned to do over the past few hours, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The city did not change. The night did not shift. But I did. And as I started walking, I realized something that settled deep in my chest with quiet certainty. This time, I was not being pulled into his world. I was walking into it on my own. I checked the time 3 times before I left my apartment, like the numbers might change if I stared at them long enough. Like midnight might come slower if I refused to believe it was already close. But time did not wait for doubt, and neither did whatever I had stepped into. The city felt different at that hour, quieter but not empty, the kind of quiet that carried weight instead of comfort, where every passing car sounded louder and every shadow seemed to stretch a little further than it should. I kept walking anyway, my steps steady even though my thoughts were not, replaying everything that had led me here, the alley, the signal, the way he had looked at me like I was no longer just a stranger passing through his world. I should have stayed home. That thought came and went like a reflex, automatic, familiar, but it did not hold the same power it would have yesterday. Because yesterday, I still believed I had a choice to walk away. Tonight, I knew better. When I reached the corner he had not even specified, but I somehow understood, I slowed down without meaning to, my eyes scanning the street, searching for something I could not quite define, but knew I would recognize when I saw it. And there it was. The same black car, parked just far enough from the streetlight to remain half-hidden, its presence subtle but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. My pulse picked up, not out of panic this time, but anticipation, a quiet awareness that whatever happened next would not be accidental. I took one more step forward, then another, closing the distance until I stood just a few feet away, the cool night air brushing against my skin as I hesitated for half a second longer than I needed to. Then the back door opened. Not dramatically, not quickly, just enough to reveal the space inside, dimly lit, controlled, waiting. No words, no instructions, just an opening. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself the way I had learned to do, and stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a soft, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been, like a line being drawn between two versions of my life. He was already there. Of course he was. Sitting in the same composed stillness I had come to recognize, one arm resting along the seat, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested control rather than comfort. His eyes lifted to meet mine the moment I settled across from him, and for a second, the space between us felt charged with everything that had not been said yet. "You came," he said, his voice low, even, as if there had never been any doubt. I held his gaze this time, steady despite the way my heart beat just a little faster under the weight of it. "You told me not to be late," I replied, and the faintest shift touched his expression, not quite a smile, but something close to acknowledgement. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It felt intentional, like he was giving me space to understand exactly where I was before he filled it with something else. I glanced briefly toward the window, the city lights passing in soft blurs as the car began to move. The motion so smooth I barely noticed it at first, and when I looked back at him, he was still watching me, still measuring something I could not fully see. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked, not as a test, but as a confirmation of something already decided. I considered the question, not rushing the answer this time, because I understood now that guessing was not enough, that he valued something more precise than that. "Because I saw something," I said, carefully. He shook his head once, a small, controlled motion. "Many people see things," he replied. "They forget." His gaze held mine, sharper now, more focused. "You did not." The words settled between us, heavier than before, because they were not just observation, they were definition. I swallowed lightly, aware that whatever I said next would shape more than just this moment. "I could not," I admitted, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in it, no attempt to soften the truth. Something shifted again, subtle but real, like a piece of something larger had aligned exactly where it was meant to. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable but no longer distant. "Good," he said quietly, and that single word carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because it meant this was not a mistake in his eyes. It was a decision, a deliberate one. My breath steadied as I realized what that meant, not just for him, but for me, because this was no longer about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was about being chosen to stay. He studied me for another moment, then added, softer now, but no less certain, "Then you will not miss what comes next." And in that moment, as the city blurred past outside and the distance between who I was and who I was becoming quietly disappeared, I understood something with absolute clarity. He did not bring me here to protect me. He brought me here because I saw the world the way he did. And that changed everything.